Hello, everyone, and welcome to this webinar, which is the first in a four-part series that APCA created as a social justice toolkit. These webinars are focused on, activating youth and other folks who want to get involved in the social justice movement. So we will be covering a few topics about, what social justice looks like in different avenues, and hopefully get you excited and engaged in social justice work and help you with some of the tips and tricks for success. So my name is Alyshia Gonzalez. You're going to be hearing my voice on all of the webinars, so I just wanted to introduce myself. I am a Los Angeles native, born and raised, and then I went to the University of Oregon my freshman year. I quickly transferred to ASU, and I've been in Arizona the last 4 years. So a predominant amount of my work has been in Arizona. I have worked as a facilitator. I've worked with nonprofits. I've done a lot of campaigning work also. So I just wanted to let you know a little bit about my background because you'll be hearing my voice, but also because I want you to know that, these webinars that I have helped develop are coming directly from experience and just some of the best practices that I've seen in the movement. So feel free to make all of these things your own. That's really what the space is for. That's really what APCA's goal is, to just kind of give you some tools and ideas about what social justice can look like, and then have you move forward in your own way, in whatever way that looks, okay? So we're gonna go ahead and get started here. So the first series, or what I recommend, is that you watch this PowerPoint first, or this webinar first. Basically, we're going to be covering identity and you, and understanding how we see ourselves in the world and how we see ourselves in the work. So this will kind of give you an introduction to some social justice terms and thought processes, and then the other three parts will give you ideas and avenues on how to enact social justice in your community, okay? So I did just put APCA's accessible information, like their address and phone number. I know that this will probably be distributed over state lines, but if you are in Arizona or want to connect specifically with the APCA team in Arizona, that information will be accessible to you always. So forgive this first part of the presentation. We decided to do it on a different medium that's not PowerPoint, so I know you see the entirety of my screen, but I promise you the next ones, it will be more so looking like a traditional PowerPoint, if I may. Okay, so let's go ahead and get started. So the first thing that we really want to talk about is, like, what is identity and why is it important, right? So, we hear a lot of things in the media nowadays about identity politics and kind of a demonization of what identity means and your existence, and how it's being used too much. But really, it is the core principle of social justice work, right? So basically, identity as a basic definition is the fact of being who or what a person is or thing, right? Or a close similarity or affinity. So when we think identity, we think I'm male or female, I am a first generation student, I am, from this cultural background, and all of those things tie together to make a person exactly who they are in the unique way that they are, right? So in the context of social justice, identity is a socially distinguishing feature that a person takes special pride in, right? So it's kind of reclaiming that identity is just this thing that you have, as opposed to a place of pride for you. So a lot of people view these as unchangeable social consequences. So, sex, race, gender, religious affiliation, class, skin color, cultural group, ethnicity. Obviously, there's some things in here like your gender or religious affiliation that you could change, even your class, but for the most part, as we are growing up and existing, these are the ways that society categorizes us, and that we subsequently have to move through these identities in order to succeed, right? So basically, we want to understand identity because we first want to understand what intersectional identity is. So there are many parts that make up a person. And when we think about intersectional identity, what it really is the interconnected nature of social categorizations, including but not limited to your race, class, gender, and they create overlapping interdependent systems that are, discrimination advantages and that sort of thing. So like, for example, Jane is a mixed race woman who is a first generation college student and identifies as lesbian. Her intersections include gender, as she identifies as a woman, right? So we definitely want to separate that from sex. So sex is something that is assigned at birth, and you are usually either assigned male or female. But that's not necessarily representative of gender, right? Gender is a construct, and we learn gender over time by doing different behaviors. But identifying as a woman as your gender is a specific intersection of your identity, right? Because there's certain privileges and there's certain difficulties that come with existing as a woman, right? And then she's a first generation college student, so that usually kind of attributes to her class. Folks from a lower income background usually, have a lower class system or are more likely to be a first generation college student, so that gives us an identity aspect to her. And she also identifies as lesbian. So lesbian is her sexuality. Obviously, being lesbian is not, although there's been leaps and bounds for, equal marriage and that sort of thing, being lesbian can be widely unaccepted in certain spaces. So that's also an intersection of her identity. So basically, she has all of these parts that make her who she is. And because of that, she has to work through the world a certain way, right? She has to walk through the world. She has to be cognizant of her womanhood, of her sexuality, of her class, as she applies for jobs, as she, moves forward through society, as she creates representation for herself. So that's why understanding identity is important, because you're able to see the social categorizations that you belong to and, subsequently do something about it if you so deem it necessary, right? So we're going to do a little exercise to help you kind of understand yourself and understand how other people see you, right? So I'm going to go ahead and explain the exercise, and then what I would recommend you to do is go ahead and pause the webinar and participate in the exercise with yourself. Obviously, if you're watching this alone, you can kind of bounce off my ideas and how you explain this, but ideally you would be in a group, and you guys can go ahead and sit and discuss the differences in how you see yourself and how other people see you, right? So basically that's the two circles, right? So I actually did, a representation of some things that I'm familiar with. So I see myself as a mixed race person, so I'm Mexican and Vietnamese. I think I'm very passionate. I'm a first generation student. I am bisexual. I, have different aspects and identities, and this is how I see myself. Like when I'm out in the world, these are the things I notice about me. But when I think about how others see me, right, and this could be strangers or people you work with or students or peers or classmates, it can be different, right? And it's not always negative. It's not always positive. So it's just the kind of the reality of how people see you. So for me, they do see me as a woman. I do present as a cisgender woman. And for folks who don't know, cisgender means that you present as the gender that you were assigned at birth. So that's obviously folks who are like, I was assigned female at birth and I present my gender as a woman, so I'm cisgendered. I would say that people see me as brown because I'm obviously brown. Being biracial or mixed race, it's really hard to categorize people. It's really hard to kind of figure out what I am, or you get that question a lot, like, what are you? What are you mixed with? And so I think that people see me as brown. Like they at least know that I'm a person of color, even though I know internally where my, cultural mix is at, right? So I think folks see me as educated. Obviously, like I said, I do a lot of facilitation work. And, when I walk into spaces, a lot of folks don't assume that I am a first generation student just because of the way that I carry myself. And that can be a good and bad thing at the same time, right? Because that's something that's part of my identity. I have traditionally been in relationships with men. So I think a lot of people would see me as heterosexual, right? Which, I have no problem with because it is affords me a certain privilege to be able to walk through life and exist in an accepted type of relationship. But there is another aspect to my sexuality that a lot of people don't think right off the bat. And then another thing that I put kind of in opposition to passionate is I see myself as passionate. I think I talk with passion. I think I move my hands a lot when I talk. And while that's passionate to me, a lot of people, because of my background, they see me as angry, right? They see me as too much or abrasive, or I talk too much, or this kind of thing. And so the way I see myself in a positive light may necessarily be a negative light in the way that other people see me. And that doesn't even necessarily mean it's my fault. It means that, there's different ways I can communicate to different folks. And it also means that because of these intersections of my identity, I'm inherently perceived a certain way, right? So that's a little explanation of the exercise. Go ahead and pause the webinar. Take 5 minutes to draw the circle. List the way you see yourself and the way others see you following the example. And then please share out with your peers and discuss the similarities and differences between the two circles and kind of the themes that you two find, or all of you find between each other, right? So we'll see you back in a second. Okay, so to continue on, the next thing about identity is that our certain categorizations in certain social groups kind of develop our values a little bit, right? And values eventually drive our mission. And when I mean mission, what I mean is whatever you're passionate about, whatever your cause is that you want to move forward and make a change for, that is your mission, right? So values ground us in our collective liberation. And I know that sounds kind of jargony, but what we mean by that is that when you share values with somebody and your values are tied to the liberation of everybody, it brings the whole group of all these different intersecting identities together for this one single mission, right? So they unite us, they help us make connections with each other. I'm sure as you've seen, even when you sharing in the last exercise about how people see you and others see you, I'm sure there were a lot of similarities, and that's a connection piece, right? And then, so values do influence the institutions that we are a part of, and norms and vice versa. So for example, like if you value politeness, if you value people opening the door for you, or you please and thank you, just niceties and manners, then you're gonna have those in your day-to-day life interactions, right? You're going to make sure you say please and thank you. And then pretty soon we've created this norm of people having basic manners of saying please and thank you, of holding the door open for folks, of making sure that we smile at people on the street. And so that's just like a small example of a value, right? And values are also the reason we do the work. We tackle problems, but without values, we can't recognize something as a problem, right? So if justice is not a value for us, we can't recognize injustice because we don't care about justice. So the absence of justice is not something that's going to affect us in our day-to-day life, So if it's valuable for us that families stay together, that families are able to grow up together regardless of where they're born, then it is a natural reaction to fight against family separation at the border, because it is attacking our value system, right? So we have another exercise for you to do that's going to help you kind of narrow down your values. I'm going to be honest in saying that this exercise is probably really difficult. You might want to take a little more time for it. So I do recommend that you pause this webinar and continue on with the exercise and share with your peers, and then come back to the webinar. So basically what I've created for you here is a list of values, right? These aren't supposed to be encompassing of all values, definitely just kind of some key ones that folks think of when they think of values, right? So what we're going to do for the exercise is, from this list, you're going to pick your top 5 values. And then after you pick your top 5, from that top 5, you're going to pick 3. And then from your 3 top values, you're going to pick one single value that you use to represent you, that above all else, this value is the most important to you at this point in your life. Now, this is going to be really difficult. Like, I'll tell you, most people go into this and they're like, oh, okay, great, we're going to just pick values and that's awesome. But in reality, it's really hard to narrow down your values to one, because you'll see how deeply we hold our values, right? So I'm going to give an example of mine. So I picked community, integrity, honesty, justice, and independence, right? Those were like my 5 core values when I did this exercise. And then, if I had to narrow it down, I would say integrity is important to me because, making sure that I can count on someone, that someone's going to show up when they say that they do, is really important, that I exhibit that as a person. Justice is important to me because I believe in equity and liberation for everybody. So that has to be a core component to existence. And then community is kind of, everyone you connect to and that you're fighting for. So that's so important to me also. And so after a lot of deliberation, I was able to narrow it down to justice, right? So justice is my #1 value. I feel like if you have justice, you will have integrity, you will be able to have community because everybody is taken care of. So that's kind of me explaining my value to you. And some of you may relate to this value and some of you may have a different value. But one of the most important parts of the exercise is to make sure that you share out that one value with your peers, right? You want to talk about why you picked that value, how it was hard for you to narrow down. So you can each share your top 5, your top 3, and how you got to 1, kind of in the way that I did. And then see what the common themes are. See what are the values of your group. Is it family? Is it democracy? Is it privacy? Is it leadership? Is it ethics? And kind of list them all out so you can get a good sense of everybody in the room and kind of where all of you stand in regards to your values. So go ahead and take some time. I would pause this webinar now. Go ahead and complete the exercise, and I will see you back in a little bit. Okay, perfect. Welcome back. So now that you've all picked your one value, what we're going to do is we're going to turn that into a value statement. So value statements are so important to the work because it allows you to say in 2 to 5 sentences exactly what you value and what you're going to do because you value it, right? So it kind of grounds us in understanding of where we want to move with our mission, but it also lets the outside world know what we care about and why we care about it. So the first most important thing to remember is that this is your value statement. There is no right or wrong answer. There is no critique in the validity of your value. Maybe in like the sentence structure, you might work on that a little bit. But I want this to feel deeply personal to you and something that you can stand by. And if you had to wake up every day and look yourself in the mirror, this is a value statement you can say with full conviction, right? So the most important thing about a value statement is to keep it concise. Like I said, short paragraph, 2 to 5 lines is sufficient. If you can't articulate it very quickly, then you probably need to do some more thinking about your value statement, right? And then you also always want to write in a positive, affirming tone. People naturally gravitate towards positivity. It's just an innate human nature. So the more positive your statement, then the more it'll reach people, right? So for example, avoid using negative sentences. So I will not lie to anyone instead of I will be truthful in all my actions and words. So that creates an action statement. It also creates a sense that being truthful is part of your values and that you're going to actively do the work to make sure that you uphold this value, right? You can write more than one mission or value statement. If you want to write a value statement for each of the 5 values that you picked, by all means, go ahead and do so. But for the purpose of this exercise, we're going to write one. And, you can use this exercise later when you pick what work you're wanting to do, whether it's housing insecurity or racial justice or LGBTQ youth outreach or whatever your passion is, you'll be able to use this exercise to write a value statement around it, right? And then just to keep in mind too that in a vast majority of cases, your mission/value statement is how you impact others directly or indirectly. So I'm going to go ahead and show you a couple examples of what that could possibly look like. So we have some short ones, which are, great in themselves. And then we have kind of a longer one that talks a little bit about the community and what they're going to do. So, because I value love and family, I support all people's right to adoption and family, right? So you can see very clearly, I value love and family. Those are my 2 values. Because I value love and family, I support all people's right to adoption and family, which means you can very clearly see how you're impacting people here and what cause you care about. So, a lot of same-sex folks or, people on the gender spectrum want to adopt kids, and it's sometimes demonized or not even accessible to folks of the same sex to be able to adopt a child. But because you value love and family, you're going to make sure that you work to fight so that every healthy environment and healthy loving couple can have a child and create a family, right? So again, because I value respect and stewardship, I work and believe in environmental justice. So, you know, respect and stewardship, respect for the earth, respect for, you know, people having access to clean air, water, and other, you know, vital sources of energy. And so you work in environmental justice because it's a service work, it's a stewardship, right? So then we go to like the more extensive example. Because I am committed to a community that has a responsive government and to a society where community members affirm each other and are engaged and empathetic, I advocate for the government to remove roadblocks to civic engagement and instead encourage integral involvement in the public process of all communities. So that one was a mouthful, right? It's a lot. It seems like kind of a run on, but it is a very great value statement in the fact that it talks about responsible government, affirming community members. So obviously you can see that community and responsibility are big value statements for them. And not only is it saying what I advocate for, so I advocate for the government to remove roadblocks to civic engagement. So again, attacking voting rights issues and that kind of thing, we can absorb that from the value statement. But you're encouraging integral involvement in the public process of all communities. So you're also activating other folks to get involved in their communities. And what does that look like? And so you're saying, these are the things I value. Because I value these things, this is what I expect of my government. And I also would like all people to get involved in this work at whatever level. So this is like a complete, succinct value statement that you could say that would get your point across and also provide some solutions to what your values are attempting to attack, right? So the next thing I kind of want to go over is types of social change. These next two slides are going to be really text heavy, so I apologize for that. However, it's important that we do go over you know, all the approaches to social change, specifically too, because, you know, conservatism usually has a monopoly on values. And what I mean by that is that, you know, you hear a lot like, we are the party of values, we are about family values, we are this and that. And it's interesting to see how values can be used in completely different political spectrums, right? So you could have someone who's completely progressive and left leaning who is like, family is an inherent value to me. And then you can have someone completely right-winged and be like, family is an inherent value to me. So what you can find the common thread is that this value is the same. While we have different methods on how to, you know, attack the value of family and make sure that it's protected and safe, we do have the same value. So as you're working in this progressive work, you'll come across a lot that conservatives somehow believe that their values are inherently better than yours. And this is how you understand and bridge those gaps with those people, right? So we're going to go from like the most radical types of social change to the most hard right types of social change, right? There's like six or seven really core types of change. So transformative, before we get into like the exact definition, transformative social change is like the Bernies of the world, right? So like completely access and equitable housing, food, security, everything for all. It doesn't even just have to be in economics, but that communally we desire equity, right? And inequality and individualism at the expense of the community are results of capitalism, imperialism, colonialism, and other socioeconomic structures. So let's break that down a little bit, right? So, you know, obviously this is a more socialist leaning method of transformative change, and it does not seek to continue to operate within the system, right? So in the United States of America, we do have a capitalistic society. We do have a system of government that was initially set up to only benefit a certain amount of the population. So it's transformative social change is saying the system is inherently broken. We need to completely scrap the system and start over, right? This is ideal. This is, you know, it's an idealistic idea of transformative social change, and it is also necessary because the transformative ideas and the idealistic nature is what can that we can imagine our world to look this way is what propels us forward, right? Is what propels us to more equity and justice. Now, in practice, it can be a little difficult. So again, these are all just types of social change to tell you what it is, to tell you what it isn't, and for you to kind of pick what is the best method for you, right? So systemic social change is what you'll see a lot of in community organizing, right? People have a right to a decent quality of life, healthcare, education, housing, and many people do not have a decent quality of life because market forces, i.e. capitalism, are not held in check. Capitalism leads to inequity, and the government and public sectors must regulate capitalism to ensure that the public and the earth's rights are upheld. Inequality happens because the government is not playing a big enough role in checking the self-interest of the market, as well as checking sexism, racism, heterosexism, and other institutionalized systems of oppression. So basically, systemic is saying we need to change the system, that the way that it was set up was not inherently bad, but we have allowed it to get out of hand, and there's not the checks and balances that in capitalism that we need for equity for every community, right? So this is a lot of working in nonprofits to attack certain issues, getting folks elected to certain seats because that's what's important to them, and they also hold their values and will help dismantle an institutionalized system of oppression. So that's the two of the most left-leaning on the spectrum. So it's almost like systemic to me is transformative is the idealistic. Systemic to me is the practice of transformative, but also understanding that change is a little bit at a time, right? Not everybody is able to make a radical change, especially to a system that's so ingrained in inequality right away. So systems is looking to chip away at the pieces a little bit at a time, right? So then a lot of the words you hear a lot too is the word liberal, right? You hear liberal, oh, liberal this, liberal that. And so this is just going to give you a better idea of what liberal is. And it'll also be interesting for you to see that liberal is not necessarily the most left-leaning that you could possibly be in social change, right? So people are essentially self-interested, and the current system is essentially fair. Individual rights are of primary importance and should be interfered with as little as possible. Capitalism is the most efficient way to structure society. Inequity happens because of market failures or historical wrongs that can be made right through limited government intervention. When everyone is placed on a level playing field, outcomes will be more equal. So liberal is like, when I want you to think liberal, I want you to think establishment politicians, right? So people who are like, there are historical inequities that have happened. There are things that are not being held responsible in the market, but these are easy fixes. And when we fix these and put everyone at an equal playing field, then everything's going to be okay, right? So people are self-interested. That's why capitalism works. So as long as we kind of tease out these inequities that have happened in the past, we'll be able to keep the system and continue moving forward. So now we're kind of moving into centrist and like conservative and hard right? So like neoliberal is very interesting because it's almost like I would think libertarian when I hear neoliberal. So someone who may be more socially liberal but more fiscally conservative. So this kind of gives an idea that people are essentially self-interested. The market makes the most efficient decisions for society. So like capitalism is the best method. It makes the right decisions. Inequality is mostly natural and a result of different ability or life circumstance. So you're kind of born into your position. It is what it is. A small amount of inequity or injustice happens due to market failures. So imperfect formation, monopolies, etc., that can be fixed through working to improve market mechanisms, such as breaking up monopolies and legislating competition. When the market is supported to work at its best, the outcome is best for society as a whole. So neoliberals have a lot of faith in capitalism, right? They think that it's an inherently good system, that it does work, that the way to fix it is not to attack the social inequities, but really the economic inequities that exist. So, improving market mechanisms, breaking up the monopolies, so like the fact that our TV is owned by 3 major corporations, and making sure that, once we fix the system, then everybody's going to be good, basically, right? So conservative is people are self-interested and capitalism works, so they're big proponents of capitalism. Inequity is natural and is a result of differences of ability or life circumstance. So again, very similar to neoliberals in that way. The government should have less or no role in ensuring equality. If there is a government role in ensuring equality, it should be for the deserving poor only. So let's unpack that a little bit, right? So when we hear conservative, a lot of the things that they talk about in regards to their values is that you have to pull yourself up by your bootstraps, that we really don't believe in big government, right? So that's really what the tie is as you've seen as we've gone through the definitions. It's like a lot of government has a lot of social control to government has less and less social control, right? And when we talk about the deserving poor, people are thinking, we hear a lot about people on welfare, or people abusing the system for food stamps or that kind of thing. So that's kind of a lot of the narrative of what we hear about people who are not the deserving poor. The deserving poor are people who have really tried their best, really pulled themselves up by the bootstraps and really need help. But what we'll come to understand, especially as you get more involved in the work, is that there's no such thing as a deserving poor, that all poor are deserving, and that certain circumstances may be more palatable or understanding to some people who are not from that background, but that doesn't mean that someone is deserving of any less help just because they don't come from like the cookie cutter picture perfect story of what poverty is supposed to look like, right? So poverty happens when the government is not supporting the corporations and rich enough. When the economy is doing well through support for the rich, prosperity trickles down to the poor in a way that is in line with the current social order. So again, this is, idea of trickle down economics. So you saw that with our latest tax cut bill. So at the less tax cuts that we have for the rich support the system of capitalism. They create industry movement and jobs. And because the rich are getting richer, then eventually that prosperity is going to, trickle down to the, poor or economically disadvantaged folks, and it will, propel us to work, to have capital, to have gains, because the highest part of our capitalistic society is doing well. So hard right conservative people are self-interested in capitalism, colonialism, and imperialism work. So basically, you hear a lot of folks who are like, a lot of the countries that are now dependent on the U.S. are because of colonialism, and they had this thriving society, and then folks came in and totally, ravished their land and their people, and now they're at a less advantaged place, right? Or sometimes completely erased. And so a lot of hard right conservative folks believe that it was natural, like it was manifest destiny, in the same way that people move from the east to the west, and that it worked and it was what it was supposed to be, and it eventually created the society we live in now. So inequity is a result of actions of the individual. So hard right conservatives do not believe that there is an inherent systemic inequality. They believe that the choices you make in life determine your outcome, right? And there's nothing else acting upon that if you can really pull yourself up by the bootstraps, if you really want it and work hard enough, you're going to get it. Because the system is fair, those who are on the bottom deserve to be on the bottom. Those with more resources are those who are more capable, and therefore they should make decisions for society. Inequity is efficient and should be maintained. The system needs for less capable people to do grunt work, while the more capable people run society. So again, your value is tied to how you can produce labor. It's tied to your ability to work, and we all know that not everybody starts at an equal playing field. So it may be really easy for someone with two legs to run a race, but if you only have one leg, it's going to take you a little longer. But that doesn't mean that you're any less valuable of a person or less deserving of a place in society where everything is equitable and accessible to you, right? So these are just like the complete range of types of social change. So I just wanted to give you an overview of that so that you can move forward and kind of understand what's going to be your best method for social change. What is something that resonates with you, and how are you going to move forward to use social justice work to use this type of social change, right? So there are 4 main approaches to social justice, which I'm going to go over in this toolkit. And I just wanted to give you like a quick overview of each single one. So that way you can pick which next webinar you're going to watch if one piques your interest more than the other. Or you can watch all of them and kind of, decide from there what your activism, what your social justice work is going to look like. So I created this quick, acronym, DATE, right? So regardless of the approach that you pick for social justice, you want to make sure you're doing your research. You want to make sure that you're not taking things at face value. I highly recommend Google Scholar and different platforms that are, totally unbiased. Well, we can't be completely unbiased, but, are more academic in approach, or give you really the facts of a situation so that you can understand exactly what you're signing up for and exactly what you're going against, right? Also, you always want to assume positive intent. So when you're working with teams, especially with things that attack our values or are really important and high stakes, there's bound to be a little tension, and that's how you work together better as a team. So you always want to assume positive intent. You always want to assume, even if things go awry, that the person who may be responsible did try to do something positive and it wasn't malicious in what they were doing, right? Teamwork makes the dream work. I know that's cliche, but it's so true. Teamwork is the epitome of understanding. It is the only way that you're going to get the work done, because you can't do it by yourself, right? So make sure you value your team. Make sure that you're communicating with your team, that you're open and understanding of what their expectations, and that your value alignment stays the same. And then the next thing I would tell you is expect the unexpected. So regardless of what approach you take, there's always going to be things that happen that you did not necessarily plan for. And a lot of things are going to have to be learned with experience, as with most things in life. So what I would say is always have a contingency plan, always have a backup plan, always have a safety plan. And we'll go over some of those things and some of the approaches that we do, but always to be on your toes when you are doing your work, and just making sure that you know that you have a backup plan if anything were to go in a way that you did not want or expect to. So the 4 approaches that I'm going to talk to you about are community organizing, direct action, artivism, and the frontier. So let me go ahead and just give you a brief overview. So when we think community organizing, the definition is the coordination of cooperative efforts and campaigning carried out by local residents to promote the interests of their community. So community doesn't always have to be politics, but community is like community organizing is very structured. So it's, political, or it's activating your community around a certain issue to get that issue changed, right? So those phases of social organization, which constitute a conscious effort on the part of a community to control its affairs democratically and to secure the highest services from its specialists, organizations, agencies, and the institutions by means of recognized interrelations. So that's just a very long-winded way of saying you're organizing your community to expect the best services for the community. So that can look like voter work, nonprofits, online organizing, workshops, educational activities, and campaigning, right? So a next big thing that's been big in the media as well is direct action. So direct action can be a lot of different things. There is going to be a PowerPoint on this also, as I said about the last ones as well. So it's the use of strikes, demonstrations, or other public forms of protest rather than negotiation to achieve one's demands, right? So social justice definition is to either obstruct another political agent or political organization from performing some practice to which the activists object, or to solve perceived problems with traditional societal institutions, government, religious organizations, established trade unions, when they're not addressing to the satisfaction of the direct action participants. So this can look like protests, sit-ins, die-ins, boycotts, and demonstrations. And this is kind of like, a lot of the first step to organizing, right? So you usually have direct action and then some form of community organizing afterwards. So artivism is not new in practice, but it is new with the amount of notoriety it's getting, right? So artivism is a word that's combining art and activism, right? So it's developed, because of anti-war movements, anti-globalization protests, and those kinds of things. So basically what it is just using your artistic platform or your artistic talent for a social good. So it can look like poetry, demonstrations, dance, music, rap, sketching, painting, murals, tagging. Tagging is, obviously I like to clarify that a little bit. So it's, people can count it as graffiti, but tagging usually has more of a nuanced approach where people know that it's your tag of the work that you're doing. Skits, graphics, and literature. So this is a really open platform for people to decide, how to use art in a way that moves people, right? And then the last one is the frontier. So we wanted to include this piece because we definitely want to let you know also that APCA is ready and willing to be the community space where you develop what social justice looks like to you, right? So the definition of the frontier is the extreme limit of understanding or achievement in a particular area. So in social justice, it's the platform for folks to develop innovative social justice practices. So if you go through these PowerPoints and you realize, not every single one is speaking to me, or I haven't picked one that really identifies in the way that I want to do social change, then APCA is the perfect place for you to tease out ideas, to get mentorship on what that frontier looks like for you. And it doesn't have to be through APCA. I just want to throw them out there as a resource, but making sure that you have social justice practices that align with your values and your mission and your idea of a successful and equitable society. So, I have friends who do hip hop therapy for previously incarcerated men. I have friends who do comprehensive sexual education health that are doing like workshops for it. So the frontier is really yours in whatever way you want it to be. And just continue to develop the innovative practices that we're going to need to continue on this work, right? So I just want to thank you all so much. I know that was a little bit long, but hopefully you got a lot from it. You should, if you have access to this webinar, you should also have access to the slides as well, so that way you can just look at them, maybe without my voice if you so choose. I also wanted to include at the bottom here, resource, it's the cult of pedagogy. So basically, it's a resource that kind of goes a little bit deeper into identity and social justice and how the movements have started, and different things that you can use in tools and educational practices. So if you want to dive a little bit deeper into some of the work that we went over, then I definitely recommend you to do so. So again, my name is Alyshia. I want to thank you so much for participating in this webinar with me, and I look forward to seeing all the work that you guys do. Thanks so much. Bye.